Good evening.
Hello.
As the title would suggest, this evening is about your film career, mainly. Were there films, or was there a film, particularly when you were growing up, that you particularly liked and kind of inspired you, and you thought, well, yeah, I could get into that kind of world?
You have to remember what kind of films were knocking around when I was a child. I remember the school cinema club was full of things like the Titfield Thunderbolt. Things changed a lot when I went to art school. Mm. And suddenly you discover there's this person called Antonioni who can make a film where there's a scene with a piece of paper blowing down the street, or Fellini, and then you start to wake up a bit and things change. I don't know that I thought this would be part of my life. To be perfectly honest, having a film career at all is a bit of a surprise.
Yes, we'll get into that. Yes. As you say, you kind of started out with graphic design and typography and all of that, didn't you? Mm-hmm. That was your first professional. So how did the move into acting come about?
I went to a school that had a very strong drama tradition, and so there was a lot of theatre going on, and I still acted while I was at art school. A lot of life is about hindsight, it seems to me, and now as I sit here looking at, or not looking at that, you can see how the dots join up a bit, and you see that, at the time when it was a bit panicky about will I go to university or art school at 18, because certainly the idea of going to drama school wasn't on the cards at all. The art school part of me gets put together with the drama school part of me and the theatre part of me, and then somewhere in there you find that there's this desire and this sort of somewhat trained desire to direct.
And you went to RADA. Did you enjoy that experience?
Well, I didn't go there till I was 25, so fortunately I wasn't actually the oldest person there, but RADA was like where you realize that, this is my head, this is my body, and we spend a lot of our time, with a huge dividing line between the two, and so there was a real physical sensation of the body sighing with relief that you had put the two things together in the right place.
You took part in a lot of plays, you acted on the stage, you got into television, Barchester Chronicles on the BBC, Romeo and Juliet you starred in, and Les Liaisons Dangereuses became a huge hit in the West End on Broadway on stage. Was that the key to getting you the role in Die Hard, your first film?
Totally. I figured, or somebody told me, you've got about 2 weeks of people's attention. We'd finished 6 months in New York, and so I went to LA and did the round of meetings, and I didn't know how any of this happened. I didn't know anything about LA. I didn't really know anything about the film business. I went to meet some casting directors. I went to meet some producers, and I think it was 2 days after I got there, I was offered Die Hard, and never made a film before, but I was extremely cheap.
That's the kind of film now that we routinely refer to as a blockbuster. It's a genre of film that we know and recognise instantly. Did you know what you're getting yourself into when you took that role?
I read it and I said, what the hell is this? I'm not doing an action movie. And agents and people said, Alan, you don't understand, this doesn't happen. You've only been in LA 2 days and you've been asked to do this film. Okay, but I suppose ignorance was bliss in a way, because it reminds me of the discussions that went on, which must have been out of me being stupid, because I was being fitted for all this terrorist gear in the early days of the putting of the film together, and I said, why would I be wearing this when I've got all these huge hulks who are going to do all the dirty work? So I was just thinking, if I was wearing a suit and not all of this terrorist gear, then maybe there could be a scene where I put on an American accent and he thinks I'm one of the hostages. And I left this note on Joel Silver's table saying, please think about this, I think it might be interesting. And then I went back to England, and I kind of got the Joel Silver, get the hell out of here, you'll wear what you're told. Okay, fine. And then I came back and they handed me the new script. So, it just pays to occasionally use a little bit of theatre training when you're doing a movie. What do you have for breakfast? Where did he come from? I'm going to look ridiculous in those costumes.
And what was it like? I mean, there is a lot of action involved, and you get involved in a lot of the action. Was that something that came to you easily, or was it how did you find it?
If you look carefully at any of the scenes with the guns, you'll see me blinking. I think they may have had to cut those out. You can't stop yourself. It's a bit shocking how thrilling it is to shoot a machine gun. That I discovered.
I bet.
I remember towards the end of the shooting, they said, we have this shot. They came to me sort of not looking me quite in the eyes. We've got this shot at the end. We want to, you've got to fall from the top of the building, and we could use the stand-in, but of course if we'd use the stand-in, we'd have to put it on the back of his head going down that way. I thought about it. I said, I'll do it. Because this is before the days of CGI. Now anybody do it, because you'd just be falling nowhere, and they'd blow your clothes in a computer. That had to be done for real. So I said, so how do we do this? And they said, okay, well, we'll train you. Which meant one afternoon, I think, of dropping from 10 feet, 15 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, and so on. And I remember the guy who was doing it saying, okay, what you've got to remember is I had to pull my own cord to release me. I had to remember to bring the gun up and get it in the frame. And then he said, as you're going down, make sure you spread your arms into a kind of star shape, because if you don't, you'll start turning and you'll land on your head and kill yourself. So it was sort of challenging. Yeah. And we did it 3 times at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was the very last shot of mine in the film.
Wow.
Just in case.
I think we could tell.
But actually, it was an interest. Yep. Just to say, it was. These are the days. We are talking about a film that's 28 years old or something. And what was interesting was what they were doing technically and why they wanted to do it, because there was a huge tower down the side of the soundstage, and I was, of course, falling onto an airbag. But as I fell, there were cameras all the way down, which were electronically linked to the camera that was on me, so that as I fell through the beams of those cameras kept that one in focus. Now they just press a computer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. As I say, it was a kind of a blockbuster. It was an action, as you said, am I going to do this action thriller? But it did have a really good script. I mean, we could tell from that scene. It had a different kind of feel to it than your average regular. Would you have taken the job if it hadn't have had that good script?
No. I mean, that was, you could feel that there was a story and there was actual wit in it. There were jokes, and you could feel a line through, and not to get a sledgehammer out to it, but every single black character in that film is positive and highly intelligent. So 28 years ago, that's actually quite revolutionary, and quietly so.
And I guess after doing that film and doing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves as well, another hugely successful film, you could have done an endless series of huge big Hollywood films. But did you get scripts that you didn't like and turn them down, or did you just want to do other stuff and that whatever came along appealed to you and you would do other kinds of films?
Well, theatre was also always in there, so I think somewhere around that time I was also rehearsing Hamlet and doing it in small spaces around England, not in conventional theatre spaces. So, given the fact that I was 25 when I went to drama school, and 40-something before I made a movie, you kind of felt a bit of use formed, and the decision-making process is going to look... I like the risk factor in work. I like feeling a bit unsafe, and theatre, of course, is deadly.
And did Truly, Madly, Deeply feel like a kind of gamble, a risk?
No, that was... I suppose what comes around goes around in a way. Juliet Stevenson and I had done a lot of work in the theatre together, so much so that she was a bit nervous about me playing the part, I found out later. But I know him too well. He's like my brother. She was a bit nervous about that. But Anthony, it was his first film. And, now you learn all sorts of stuff that you realize you've stolen down the line, like Anthony's vulnerability on the set, the fact that he gathered the crew and actors together on day one and just said, I have one word, help. The fact that he put huge value because of his theatre writing on rehearsals. So we had 2 weeks of rehearsals to achieve whatever we achieved in that. And the fact that Juliet and I trust each other so much is, I think, gold dust when you're doing that sort of work.
A lot of people fell in love with that film and with your character and Juliet's character. When you read that script and when you make that kind of film, do you know how special it's going to be, or does that all happen afterwards?
Something happened during the shooting of it, because it was shot on 16mm, and somewhere halfway through, because I think it was going to be for television, and BBC, halfway through, all sorts of high-level discussions were going on about how maybe we should go back to the beginning and start again on 35, and then in the end we didn't, and they blew it up for cinema release. I don't know, it's one of those films that, it's very, very special for unnameable reasons. It's that speech that he has there. There's no improvising in that. Every little is in the script, and it's, you've got to obey them. But also, it's a sort of litmus test, because, you say everybody fell in love with that film. I wouldn't say the critics did.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I wouldn't say, I think it was even on Room 101 once. And I think it went down.
Yes, I guess it was regarded by some people as kind of too middle class and all of that, but they kind of weren't really looking at, it's about people, isn't it? It's about love, and it's about, some people get fixated on the class or all of that.
It's about the lights go down, and a writer/director says once upon a time, and you either hand yourself over to that or not. Yeah. And in England, we're often quite good at not.
I was going to say, because it does feel very improvisational. It feels like almost every scene, that when there's seriousness and romance happening, it's undercut with you, as we saw in that clip.
That's really to do with Anthony's experience in the theatre, I think, and he knew he would be able to, he'd understand the process more if we had had rehearsals. And I'm both sides of the fence on that one. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's great not to rehearse at all and just kind of throw yourself at it for film. And certainly if you're going to work with American actors, there's a lot of them who hate it. So you've got to be flexible. But I'm a big proponent of rehearsal.
Yes. I read an interview recently in Empire where where they asked you whether any particular roles that was close to you, your personality. And Sense and Sensibility came up, this character who's kind of very dignified and calm.
I think that was the reason.
That's one of the reasons.
Yes, I'm so dignified. No.
Did that character feel close to you, and what was kind of special about that particular version of that story?
Something I realized that I like in film, and maybe this goes back to what you were asking about before, about what films you watched. And so French cinema is of huge interest to me, and always has been, because French directors like putting the camera on the person who isn't speaking. They like to leave the shot on 2 or 3 people and just watch them interact. It fascinates me that whenever you see Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy, nobody bothers to go, let's cut to the close-up. No, because what they're both doing together is so interesting. And so the space between people is what excites me, certainly as a director, and certainly it's what one looks for on stage with another actor. What you're saying is interesting, what they're about to say is interesting, but it only becomes really interesting when this space is alive, and that's to do with actors thinking and listening, and I think that that's often thrilling on film.
When I remember going to see it in the cinema, I'm thinking, well, on top of all of the fascinating historical stuff and the fact that it could have been, as you say, an epic 16 hours, but the actual film we get is a very thrilling kind of political thriller, isn't it, as well?
I think it's brilliant what Neil and everybody achieved in 2 hours. It's extraordinary.
I was going to ask about the different directors you work with, Ang Lee, Neil Jordan, even going back to Die Hard, John McTiernan. Do you learn when you're directing, which we're going to move on to in a minute, have you learnt different things from all of those directors, or kind of did you have your own vision?
I think if you're smart, you learn from all of them, and what you know, it's kind of in what I've been saying. If you talk about Neil Jordan, and then you say Ang Lee, and then you say Alfonso Cuarón and Anthony Minghella, it's not like a generic title. You know, these are very, very, very different human beings with very different energies and opinions and relationships with actors and rhythms, and you learn from the people where you watch them and thinking, well, I wouldn't handle it like that. So you learn from that as much as going, well, I'm stealing that. That's the joy of filmmaking.
So your first film as director, which we'll talk about now, The Winter Guest, did you know, you worked on it on stage, did you think when you were working in theatre that this could make a film? Were you convinced immediately, or did it take time for that seed to develop?
No, I hadn't thought of that at the beginning. I suppose once we started to work on the set, we started to talk in very filmic terms, because so much had to be achieved, so many different worlds on a set that didn't move. You didn't cut from one set to the other. It had to be all there, including a frozen sea, and including the inside of a house, and a little park bench, and a bus stop. So I suppose once it was sort of up and running, it kind of acquired filmic qualities. And then I suppose it must have, I can't even remember now, but it must have occurred to somebody with a checkbook that we had Phila Delore playing the mother, and Emma Thompson is her real daughter, and so Sian Thomas became the kind of human sacrifice in that, which I guess she understood, that of course, you know, any producer worth their salt is going to say, well, let's put the real mother and daughter together in this story.
I think looking at the finished film of The Winter Guest, you would never know it was from a play necessarily, the way it intercuts between the different characters and the different stories. Was it a hard process to make it, or did the script and your direction tackle that issue, or did you just make it as you wanted to make it?
It's so long since I've seen that. I'm just sitting here thinking what a wonderful actress Phillida is. I just remember hours and hours sitting at the kitchen table with Sharman MacDonald, who of course since has become better known as the mother of Keira Knightley. So, and even then we had Keira running around as a 10-year-old. That's how long ago it was on the set. Yeah, I think that was always the aim. You know, we were just working out how to cut around, and then of course comes the editing room, and you start learning about that, and that the film rears up and says, I have a stake in this. I, film, will change you now, and I will tell you what to do. And the editing room does have a personality in it. You have to listen to it. So I'm sure all sorts, well, certainly the ending of the film had to be found in the editing room, because the ending we shot didn't work.
So what changed from the one you shot that didn't work? What was the original?
It was a helicopter shot, you know, hugely expensive, and we only had it for one day, and we shot this film. It's such a ridiculous time of year, because we only had daylight from 9 till 3. It was freezing cold, as you can tell. We only had one trailer. The two boys were much more interested in spending time in Emma and Phillida's trailer than they were being on the set. I had rehearsed them into the ground so that I knew that we could shoot them any scene of theirs on any day, any time, and they'd know it backwards. Because they were, 12 at the time. So, yeah, the end shot was Emma kind of waking up and accepting that she was going to have to kind of join reality in her life. It was a sense of these boys are missing, and Emma goes on a long, long run along the pier and grabs hold of the pier and is really looking. A bit like Greta Garbo in Queen Christina, you know, that shot of her at the bow and the camera comes up. And it was too ambiguous. You kept testing people's responses, and nothing wrong with Emma at all. It was just people didn't know what she was thinking. And so that was hopeless. And so the end came with us just looking and looking, Scott Thomas and I in the editing room, for how we were going to finish it. And I didn't even know how it happened, but it was just, it finishes now with one of the boys goes out across the ice, the other one doesn't go, and eventually says, wait for me. And that's the end of the film. The trouble with that was that the shot that we had of Sean walking out across the ice I didn't call cut, but the little bugger stopped and turned round.
Oh.
So I didn't have him walking and walking and walking and disappearing. So thank God for early CGI, because you get to the furthest point that you can, and then a big bit of smoke covers him up. so that you just have to imagine that he kept on walking.
I wanted to mention Emma Thompson, because fantastic in that film. You're also together in Love Actually. We did a Life in Pictures with Emma here.
Oh, right.
And the scene in Love Actually where she's in tears because of what you've done to her. What's it like for you watching that spectacular scene with the Joni Mitchell in the background?
Well, again, you know, you just have to play your story. And my story was, am I going to get away with this?
Yeah.
No, it's a brilliant piece of writing. Again, it's like, you know, there's a scene that has no dialogue. Let's trust that. And yes, now that scene of Emma's is a very famous scene in the film.
I wanted to ask about a couple of films that we're not showing clips of, but I think fantastic work in the late 90s, early 2000s. Dogma, Kevin Smith's film. I remember interviewing him at the time, and he absolutely was in love with you and thrilled that you were taking part in this curious indie religious epic.
You know, I'd seen his work, and you're going to have to remind me of the title now. Chasing Amy.
Chasing Amy, yeah.
Which I loved.
Yeah.
And this possibility came up, and I said, please, to the American agents, I want to work with Kevin Smith. And then it happened.
And was it as fun as you'd hoped?
Oh, he's fantastic. I mean, if you go, it got chosen for Cannes, that film, and you have to put on the bow tie and all of that palaver. Not Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
Flip-flops and sawn-off jeans as we go up the steps to the screening. Completely irreverent to the whole process, but he's a brilliant writer. Dogma's really probably a 4-hour film with the material we shot, because I don't know how he cut that one down.
No, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And around the same time, I think one of the funniest kind of Hollywood comedies, Galaxy Quest. Did you know, when you read that script, did you know immediately this was something special?
All the actors did. The brilliant thing that Dean Pariseau did on that film was, apart from Tim Allen, and I guess appropriately apart from Tim Allen, everybody else grew up in the theatre. So he was like an alien to us. You know, he'd kick down the door of the makeup trailer in the morning and he'd yell, "Number 1 is here." And all the rest of us are looking at our script. So it was a perfect marriage of acting energies, I suppose, and it meant that those of us playing the actors, we became like this tight little group against the pressures of producers coming out of the gloom first thing in the morning going, they're still talking, when are we going to start shooting? We were able to turn around and say, look, just give us 20 minutes and we will have sorted out the whole day, because we'll know what we're supposed to be doing as a group of actors.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that worked.
Yeah.
And we should mention 8 films in 10 years where you played the same role in the Harry Potter films of Snape. What was that like playing? Did you know at the start what direction that character was going? Did J.K. Rowling tell you, or did you kind of, how much did you know about it?
People think I knew a lot, and I didn't. When I was asked to do it, there were only 3 books written. And so, by and large, I was learning with the readers. Every time there was a new book, basically, I was just going, oh, I'm still in it. But when I was asked to do it, and I'd read the first book, and I said, look, I really need to talk to her. I can't play this. I don't know where this character's going. So they put me in touch with her and over the phone, and she was with her sister that day, and she said, I can't talk now, I'm with my sister. I'll talk to you tomorrow. So that's how much Jo Rowling kept it to herself. And then she gave me one, it wasn't even a fact, she just gave me one piece of information, and I promised her I would never share it, and I never will, and not that it's anything people don't know now, but she gave me one piece of information which made me know that whatever happened, I had to try to drive down 2 roads at the same time until all the facts emerged. So I knew there was ambiguity.
Right. And essentially you were making, as I say, 8 huge films, huge budget, massive casts, loads of special effects.
Well, they were, the producers were.
That was my question. Did it feel like a kind of mad situation for you involved, or did you just let it all...
It was a very changing thing, of course, as it would be over 10 years. Apart from anything else, 3 leading actors start out at 12 years old and then they're 22. You don't kind of notice that happening in a way, because once they'd got into the swing of it after the first film, it was an organizational nightmare for them, because all of the adult characters, or a lot of them, were doing other things at the time. I was directing plays, or I was making Love Actually, or I was on stage doing Private Lives here or in New York. A whole bunch of other things were going on through that 10-year period. So basically, my job was 7 weeks a year. And then sometimes they'd have to get the person that you were supposed to be acting with out at 3 o'clock because they were on stage that night. I don't know how they did it. Complete nightmare. Meanwhile, CGI is growing up along with you. So at the beginning of it all, we used to go off on location. Forget that by the end of it. We were in a pile of old grass around at the back of Leavesden Studios with a big football stadium of lights. And I will never forget, on the last film at 3 o'clock in the morning, Michael Gambon staggering up this piece of old grass, looking at me and saying, "Am I dead in this scene?" Michael. And in the first film, if anybody ever wants to look, of course, you've got the problem of kids who can only work in a certain number of hours. So sometimes there were 300 children on the set, and at certain points they all had to go off and do some schoolwork. More nightmares of organization. Solved to some extent by, if there were any scenes with, say, me and Daniel, Rupert, and Emma, of course they'd shoot on, when it was on them, it would be on their faces and I'd be there. But when we turned round, in would come the very small actors, aged 33, with a wig on their head. So that ain't the back of Daniel's head in those shots, so that we could keep working.
Obviously, those films are hugely successful and pop up on TV all the time. Do you watch yourself back? Do you watch those films? When in the huge special effect productions, do you go, "Oh yeah, let's see how this turns out"?
Some of it you kind of, you're channel surfing. Oh, God.
Yeah. What do you do? Do you watch or do you turn over?
No.
No. Why not? Why can't you watch yourself?
I think any actor will tell you, if you see yourself on screen, all you see is what you're doing wrong. This is a kind of hell for me, sitting here doing that. But,
and one thing I wanted to ask you about was Snowcake, which was in 2006, this extraordinary film with Sigourney Weaver playing someone on the autistic spectrum. And I think it's one of her best ever performances.
I agree.
And that was, it wasn't a huge success, but an incredible film. Does it irritate you when a film like that, there's a little gem of a film, doesn't end up being...
Well, it irritates me when people say things like, which I think certain people did at the time, that Sigourney is, way over the top. No, she is not. That performance is based absolutely in reality. And Angela Pell, who wrote the script, has an autistic son, and so it's written from deep place of knowledge. And I think Mark Evans is a really wonderful director. We shot that in 25 days. And I'm really proud of it. And it does annoy when people don't look carefully enough, or they haven't done their homework, and just assume that somebody's doing a bit too much acting. She's not.
No, absolutely. Well, everyone should have a look at that film if they can, because it's a fantastic piece of work. Let's move on to another maverick director, Tim Burton. Sweeney Todd was performing a duet with Johnny Depp as much fun as it looks.
He's great to act with. He really is. He's very, very generous and shares himself on the set and really listens and doesn't play rank or anything. He's terrific to work with. Of course, what you've got to remember is that we're both lip syncing, we're miming for 2 days, and we recorded it separately. So I didn't hear it put together until we got on the set. Watching that now, all I think of is, you may think I'm just going but Sondheim makes it so difficult. Those notes are not the ones you expect. The timings are not the ones your body wants. And I honestly, that music was being thrown across the rehearsal room so often. And notes that you don't want to sing. You know, you're getting... It's actually a very pretty tune, but occasionally in it, you want it to be that note, and it's that note. He's right, of course, once you learn it, but you really do think you're never, ever going to get to the note he wants.
Did you meet Sondheim and talk about, what was he like?
Very briefly, I had learnt the song. Now I'm in a room with a pianist, and a door opens. Now there are 3 people in the room, and one of them's Stephen Sondheim. And without saying much else, he just said, "Okay, let's hear it." It's the good news of starting late in this career is you just go, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? He's going to fire me. Okay, fine. I'll do my best.
And Tim Burton, what's it like? He seems a very incredibly visual director. He let the blood flow freely in that film. Yeah,
but he's a real example of don't typecast people, because I think people see all that hair and his drawings and his wild imagination, and you think it's going to be like this kind of human pogo stick on the set or something, and of course he's not like that at all. And going back to your other question, I used to watch him, and he'd be in between takes, he'd just pace up and down, and you knew. He wasn't talking to anybody, but you knew he was just locked inside his own pictures that he was putting together, or how he was going to stitch it together story-wise. And I really admired things he asked for, like on the set, it was an interior but exterior set of Fleet Street. He said, "I want the camera to be able to shoot this through 360 degrees." So this was a piece of scene painting and set construction like you really won't see anymore. And I work a lot at RADA still, and I brought all the technical students onto the set. I said, "You have got to go and look at that piece of scene painting there with like from here over to that wall. You think you're looking at a shop awning, 3 dimensions. It was painted, and there were only like a couple of little mirrors on the set to fill in the gaps, but the rest of it totally surrounded us. Really rare.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on to your second film as director, which is out this week, I believe. You had the premiere of the night, A Little Chaos. Why was this the script, the idea that drew you to directing all those years ago?
Well, on a kind of just on a technical level, informational level, of course I'd been given those 7 weeks every year that I had to shoot. I didn't have a year and a bit that you need to direct a film, because it wasn't until I'd finished Harry Potter that I could do it. Somewhere along the line, there's that weird circumstance where the letterbox clatters and 180 pages of a script dropped through. Alison Deacon, and it was her first script, although she happens to be married to Sebastian Barry, who, if anybody's read his books or seen his plays, is a wonderful, wonderful Irish playwright and novelist. So writing's in her household. She was an actress. She'd raised her kids, and she knew there was more to life. I'm going to write a script, so she did. And she won't mind me saying that she's extremely dyslexic, so this script was 180 pages, not just because it was too long, but because of the way she writes, and that means no punctuation except a comma every 3 words. So, there's quite a lot of work that had to be done before you could get to the essence of it. But still in all, I think any actor will say, or director or producer, that 4 pages in, if you're dealing with somebody who can write. And I loved the fact that she knew her subject, Louis XIV and the building of Versailles, and I loved the fact that she took it and just kind of tore the pages up of history and said, now let's see not how they rearrange themselves, but the central character is a woman that couldn't possibly have existed, a woman landscape gardener, or a woman with a job at all. So it's a male-dominated world with a lot of women who are merely decorative objects. Weirdly, that has modern parallels still. So I like that about it, the fact that you could tell a story that's set at that time, although of course you're nuts to do it because it's bringing all those attendant financing problems, building problems, weather problems, traffic problems, all of it, in order to tell a story that hopefully people lose themselves inside but think, wait a minute, this feels very modern.
Well, they were screened last week here, and there were hundreds of people. It was audience absolutely rapt watching it. It's a very obvious question, but I have to ask it. Directing yourself, that scene, how many takes of yourself did you demand?
Rafe Fiennes is a good friend, and he directed The Invisible Woman, a year or so ago, and boy is he in that a lot more than I'm in this. I show up occasionally in this, and I have no idea how he did that. Or Russell Crowe is just directed, and he's probably in every shot of that, and Ryan Gosling, and so there's a lot of it about. No, it's not easy. It's not even, I think, for me, desirable. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'm playing Louis XIV. And of course, his wife has just died, and he's gone to this little private place, a little garden, and she's come to get some shrubs and mistakes him for the gardener. The good thing about playing Louis XIV is he doesn't move very much. So you don't have to do blocking for him because people come to him. He sits still or he stands still or he leaves. That makes life simpler, and really you just have to, so it's two actors talking to each other, so it's what I was saying right at the beginning about the wire between you, and I guess Kate and I could feel whether the scene was happening. So, and you learn, one of my great beliefs is not to think about what you're saying, think about what you're hearing, so that what you say is automatic. Then you've got a chance of something happening between you because you're not focusing on yourself, you're focusing on the other person. Then there might be a story. And Kate is one of the greatest listeners you'll ever sit in an editing room thanking God for when you want to watch a character learn about herself, which is what she has to do in this film, figure out who she is. Hours and hours of her listening wonderfully and learning stuff. So you've got the raw material there to direct yourself, and above and beyond that, Ellen Kuras, the DP, was under instructions to, don't be shy about going again. And what I was going to say before is Rafe gave me a good piece of advice. He said the danger of an actor directing themselves is you're embarrassed about going for another take on you. And I could see the sense in that.
It feels like it struck me as in one sense, a very old-fashioned piece of filmmaking, that it's a very deliberate pace. You get to know the characters. It's telling a very interesting story. Was that part of the appeal? And it has very modern parallels, as you mentioned, but it doesn't feel like a film for the MTV generation, to use that cliche.
No, although it's surprising how well, I would not have expected it. Very young people respond to it, and men. I wasn't ready for that. But I think the guilt factor kicks in, and quite a lot of men say they were terribly moved, and maybe that is something to do with slowing the pace down. As I say, the backdrop is exactly that, and it wasn't what I was focusing on, but you have to pay attention to it, and thank God for the experts that you're always surrounded by in filmmaking, because it's beautifully done. And certainly talking to Ellen, I did know that the shape of it, if that's the right word, would be that every so often we would pull back and look at a kind of tableau of the world we were in and then go inside it. And if you're making a film about people's thought processes, you can't rush it. And then it goes back to what I was saying. I don't know. I'm a ragbag of all the influences from ever. You know, as I say, watch the average French film where nothing happens.
Things do happen, we should say that. Before I throw it open to the audience, so be thinking of your questions, I want to ask you about a film you've got coming up called Eye in the Sky, which sounds like a fantastic cast. Helen Mirren, you, Aaron Paul, and the South African director, Gavin Hood. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's of course terribly current. It's so current that you worry that, it's about real stuff, so worrying about a film would be irrelevant. But it's already being overtaken in a way by real events. It's about the moral dilemmas that governments face in the use of drones against terrorists. And this film we shot in South Africa, but it's all of my scenes. I'm the head of the British Army, and they're set in Whitehall in an office with a huge screen on the wall, watching an Al-Shabaab compound in Kenya, where we know there are, because of a little camera that big that's been flown in, we know these are known terrorists that we need to take out. The only thing is, in a back room, the little drone is making sure that we can also see that there are a bunch of other people strapping on suicide vests. So we know they're about to go out to a supermarket or whatever and kill 150 people. I, the professional, say, I have to press that button. The ministers around the table are all going, yeah, but it's not my responsibility. I need to talk to the Foreign Secretary. The Foreign Secretary is having dysentery on a toilet in Tokyo. So there's a certain kind of ridiculous collage going on, but it's made more complicated by the fact that just outside that compound where the known terrorists are is a totally innocent 12-year-old girl selling bread who won't stand a chance. And of course my position in the film is you have to kill the one in order to save the many. So hopefully it's a film that just throws it straight at the audience and says, what do you think?
So it sounds like a political thriller as well as me.
Yeah, but it's also, it'll look like an action film.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for questions from the audience. We have roving mics, I think, so...
You mentioned earlier Hollywood's love of a happy ending. Is that something you have come to embrace, or do you think it's sometimes to the detriment of the art of storytelling?
I don't know. I think that, you also learn that every film is different and every circumstance is different. Sometimes it's probably right to push for that. Sometimes it's wrong. In a little chaos, it's very important to have a happy ending. That's what it's about. It's not that I feel under pressure to find it. It's important. It's what its resolution is. And it's a serious happy ending, if that's not a contradiction in terms. I think you'd have to name, one would have to have examples and say, well, that's a shame. Or that's a good idea.
Gentleman just in the second row.
Your portrayal of Eamon de Valera was superb, and you got his voice and his intonation superbly well. Did you have a voice coach, or did you watch old cinema of him? Or?
Thank you. I watched everything I could. One of the problems about playing somebody like him is, of course, you listen to tapes, but you never hear him saying things like, pass the sugar. Doesn't say ordinary things. He's always making speeches or yelling into a crowd because, of course, there weren't microphones. It was full of very memorable moments for me, not just the Irish background that I have that I don't know about, but also playing such an iconic figure in a character who, in a country where he's half adored and half loathed, and a director who says, so do you hate him yet? And then arriving in Dublin and finding that the first scene you're going to shoot is up on a platform, which to me felt like a scaffold, in front of 5,000 Dubliners who will not be coming back tomorrow when they find out how boring filming is. And I need those 5,000 people desperately. And Neil he won't mind me telling these stories. Well, he probably will. I couldn't work out what was going on because he was following me around and he was asking me all these questions. He'd come into the trailer and he'd say, "So, do you have the accent?" I said, "Yes." I thought, "I'm not going to do it for you now. Do you have the haircut?" I said, "Yes." "Do you have the glasses?" "Yes." And then we got down onto the set and I was wearing a raincoat buttoned up to the neck. It was taken from a photograph of De Valera speaking on one of the campaigns. I walked onto the set and Neil said, "Is that the costume?" I said, "Yes." "You're not helping me here, you know, I'm terrified already." But then I realized that what it was it was Neil's way of showing, not meaning to, but how frightened he was. Because this was a huge scene, and there were 7 cameras all around the square, and as I say, they weren't going to come back tomorrow when they found out that they just got to stand there. So there's something else I learned. You know, there are times when you take on the job of directing, it's absolutely terrifying.
Thank you for that question, which I meant to ask earlier. Thank you very much. A gentleman right at the back there.
You've not talked about your hilarious performance in Robin Hood. I was wondering if you could maybe share a couple of memories of working on that film.
In a nutshell, thank you if you enjoyed it. Thank God for panto training in rep, and knowing how to look for information in a script. I will cut your heart out with a spoon. Oh, that means he's insane. Because you must now say it as if you actually believe that. Etc., etc. Oh, and here's a true story. I had a habit of going and having lunch with a very great playwright, now dead, sadly, called Peter Barnes, who wrote The Ruling Class, which has just been revived, and suddenly everybody discovers Peter Barnes again. You go, I've always known that man was brilliant, and there are many scripts of his in drawers that nobody put on. But I used to go and have lunch with him, and he wrote in the reading room of the British Museum. When they kicked him out of there, he moved to the Leicester Square branch of McDonald's, because there was a phone on the wall. So anyway, I used to go and have lunch with him in the Pizza Express over the road, and I knew I was going to do Robin Hood, and I said, "Will you have a look at this script, because it's terrible." And I need some good lines. So he did, and, you know, with kind of pizza and bacon and egg going all over the script, and because Peter was, well, in his own book he said, "I've made a mess of my shirts, but then I've made a mess of my life." And so there was my script covered in pizza. But he said, "Well, here where it says you're coming down the corridor and you're wiping the scar off of the statue, you should have a wench in a doorway, and then you should say, 'You, my room, 10:30, and then turn to the other wench and say, 'You, 10:45. So I'm going, "You, my room, 10:45. I'd also given the script to Ruby Wax, who's a great friend of mine, and I said to her, "Will you read this script and come up with some lines?" And she came around to my house. I said, "You read the script?" "No, I didn't have time. Just say the lines to me." So I said, "Well, today Peter Barnes said, you have a wench there, you, my room, 10:30, you, 10:45. Immediately she said, "And bring a friend." And bring a friend. And when I presented this to Kevin Reynolds, he'd learnt by then not to tell the producers, for whatever reason, and not tell the crew or anything. And so he set this up for me to do it, and I said, "Look, I'll say these lines, you put the women there, I'll say the lines, and then I'll just clear the frame at the end of the line." Nobody knew this was happening except him. And I knew it had worked because as I cleared the camera, I saw about 80 members of the crew just go... And then occasionally Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who was being sort of seriously made Marion, she'd come over to do one of the scenes with us, and she said, I want to be in his film. And then I got a prize for it, and when I went up to the microphone, with all honesty, I just said, thank you, this will be a very healthy reminder to me that subtlety isn't everything. But panto, yeah.
Next question. Oh, lady right at the front, in the middle.
I just wondered if you ever regretted taking on Harry Potter. It obviously took up so many years of your life, and you said that it stopped you from taking on directing projects because you had to do it for 7 weeks of every year. And also whether you kind of bought the Harry Potter books and slightly hoped that Snape died in the next one so you didn't have to do it.
Well, what would be the point of regretting it? Why would you waste time regretting 10 years of your life? You know, I mean, you might as well shoot yourself. So, no, I don't regret it. I'll never forget. One night, when one of those books came out, I went down to the bookshop with the parents and the daughter of a friend who's Harry Potter obsessed. Couldn't give a shit that it was me playing. She just wanted the book. And I said, I'm coming down there. I need to see this. So we found a disguise, some glasses and some rubbish that were in the back of the car. I said, there's not going to be anybody there. This bookshop is opening at midnight. And there won't be anybody there. There were hundreds of people there. And it was like dicing with death as I got out of this car, and all these people are wearing their costumes, and I was walking around amongst them in this disguise, but obviously not in a black wig, so that was the great saviour. But then I thought, we're going to be here till 3 o'clock in the morning getting her book. This is a nightmare. So I went up to the front of the queue to the door, and I just said, excuse me, is there somebody here? I just need to ask a question. Somebody came out and I said, I'm in this film. Can you give me a copy of the book? Because otherwise there's going to be mayhem here in a minute. And so we got out of there. But the end of the story, which is the beginning of the story, is that wasn't, it wasn't her, howling with laughter in the car all the way back. It was somebody who at 1 o'clock in the morning opened this book and was completely lost inside it immediately. It's so powerful what that did for children and maybe not children as well, that you can't possibly regret it. And of course it allowed me to do all sorts of other things that don't have distribution and nobody's ever seen. And I was directing anyway in the theatre, and I was acting in the theatre. 6 months on stage here with New York, doing other movies. It was a great privilege. 7 weeks of a year.
Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Let's say this lady in the front row.
Hello, thank you. I was wondering if you thought your background in theatre gave you significant advantages or disadvantages when you were working in film?
At the beginning, you realise you have to learn to keep your head still in a close-up. You're not used to that sort of control. And I remember on Die Hard, John McTiernan said at one point, he said, I've learnt with you that I have to have everything ready for the first take. Because I was like a greyhound out of a trap. It was like, okay, act now. And I had no idea what take 2 and 3 were for. Particularly, because I thought, oh, I've just done it. What are we doing it again? So all I can say is, you learn. And if you're lucky enough to work in both, there's a definite trade-off both ways. And on stage, I've learnt to trust the fact that you can just be thinking something, and if you're thinking it accurately, 800 people will pick it up. I wouldn't have known that without doing film. and vice versa. You know, theatre training gives you a structure, and if you're not going to get it on the set, you've got something to go back to in terms of the way you look at a script and the way you mark it and the way you put little stickers in it and the way you create a structure to help the director so that you arrive on the set prepared. You know, Kate Winslet is a phenomenon at being prepared. Every director's gift, because she arrives on the set knowing exactly what the scene's about, exactly what her place in it is, but at the same time, miraculously, the information is in her and then she drops it. And then all she does is to listen for the first time to that person who's talking and obey the rules of her character now. So it isn't like ossified, it's alive. So there's a trade-off. I'm glad I did both.
So are we. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for your excellent questions. And I could see her listening all night to our guests, but just leaves me to thank Alan Rickman.
Thank
you.
you.